Hi, my name's Roxburgh, and I'm here in Seattle with Tim Soerens. And Tim is one of the co-founders of something called the Parish Collective, out of which he and his colleagues wrote a book called The New Parish. And Tim, why don't you begin by describing a little bit about what is the New Parish, what is the Parish Collective, and what are you up to here in Seattle?
Sure. Well, the Parish Collective started really not with a big dream or vision. I was planting a church. My friend Paul was transitioning a big, cool church where people were driving from all over the region.
A regional church.
A regional church down in Tacoma.
Uh-huh.
And for a lot of different reasons, we were both convinced that we wanted to reclaim the idea of being parish pastors. We wanted to be about God's renewal in a particular area, not just for those folks who are coming to our church, but all of whatever we could be a part of there. So we felt kind of alone and isolated in that regard. And so when we met, it was just life-filled. It was wonderful. And as we kept talking, we kept finding more and more friends, both here in Seattle and Tacoma and eventually all over, who were having similar conversations and desires. So the Parish Collective really grew out of that longing of how do we work together to figure out what's going on, what does it mean to be the church in everyday life, not just with an event. So that's where it's been. That was about 7 or 8 years ago we started, and there's now just under 2,000 churches that have said, we want to track with this. We want to be about God's renewal in this particular place. And we're totally open to collaborating across our neighborhoods, across our cities. So that's really the heart of the Parish Collective.
Now, out of that, you wrote this great book called The New Parish.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about what's the book about, and particularly parish. What do you mean by that? And what are you up to by using that language?
Well, we love this terminology of parish because there's not many ways of getting at holistic geographic responsibility that has some element of a telos or a goal or a hope. You could say neighborhood, you could say place, you could say locality. All of these are maybe synonymous.
Uh-huh.
But parish is a deeply religious idea. It's that we believe that we're stuck to this area, God's active here, and we get to participate in that work. Now, the reason we called it New Parish, churches have been using the word parish for millennia, but we feel like there are some new situations, some new realities around us that we should address. For example, there's not, a couple hundred years ago, maybe even a century ago, if you were the parish church, you thought that you were the one church. Well, that's pretty much it. Well, a way that we think that this is new is let's think about the church holistically in a neighborhood. It could be multiple congregations. It could be multiple groups. It's kind of silly to think about this way, and we have no idea. It's a bizarre kind of heretical idea, actually, to think about how does God view the church, perhaps. But I don't think that God has this big, Google spreadsheet in heaven somewhere just kind of looking at the different congregations and saying, there they are. I think a more realistic thing is, these are my people. This is what I'm up to in the world. Let's get after it together. So parish, it gives both a kind of a future orientation as well as it's a bit of a dare. That's what we like about it. We wrote the book because we feel like we don't want to be a new strategy or technique or model necessarily. We feel like we need a 21st century dare into God's faithful presence, right where we actually live our lives. So that's why I wrote the book, and it's been fun to hear how readers and pastors and leaders and denominational executives, etc., have said, yeah, we feel like we're after this as well.
Yeah, you've touched something
There's something going on.
Being experienced, yeah. So, parish, in many ways, it's a very old word. And you're talking about new parish. And if I understand you correctly, it is a deep sense that to be church is to dwell in, to be present, to be asking the question, how is God desiring this whole community, this whole area to thrive and to grow and to know life and health?
Yes.
And how does the church engage and participate in that?
Yes.
There's other language now that's being used that gets at some of this, and be interested in your view of the connections. So we're hearing a lot now about something called the New Commons. And of course, we remember there was a commons back in prior to modernity, and now people are talking about the new commons. What's your understanding of new commons and its connection to new parish?
Well, we actually use that language as well in the book, the new commons, because
Yeah.
we feel like if you're talking about the church and you're not talking about the actual realities and systems and stories where you're hoping to be the church, well, you're stuck in kind of an old Gnostic dilemma then.
Gnostic means...
Gnostic meaning, thank you, that there's like spirit, which is good, there's
Yeah.
body, which is bad.
It's kind of like church is good and then there's world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you want to kind of keep them as separate as you can.
Uh-huh.
We don't want anything to do with that. So we feel like God is active in the actual world, and we want to join in. So the new commons, here's what's interesting to me anyway, and this is maybe an American or North American phenomenon, but I spend now a lot more of my time engaging with movements that you could say are movements of the common good. So economic development, civic engagement, the whole world of the built environment, how we're constructing our neighborhoods, our cities, transportation, education. You can go sector by sector. And there is a really hopeful, and I would argue healing movement that's localizing that segment of the common good and saying that if we don't localize, we're in trouble.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
Because you said a lot, and so let me feed it back
Sure.
and see if I get it. That across a whole variety of areas, education, architecture, public policy, medical health,
Yes.
how we care for people in terms of food and monies, across all these sectors, there is, let's just say, a new coming together of people saying, how can these sectors thrive for the common good of people?
Yes.
And that you're saying is, that is an incredibly generative movement that's going on that in some sense is quite new.
I think it's quite new.
Uh-huh.
There's underpinnings that we could probably talk about for hours
Sure.
related to globalization.
Sure.
But what's interesting is I don't see too many people with across sectors beginning to put these pieces together. To be real honest, I actually think that some of these movements are daring or even hoping for the local church to be the local church because we need connective tissue. We need some kind of organization that would say, yes, we want to be about whole health here, but we also want to figure out a healthy living local economy, as well as we don't want to just keep building for our automobiles. We want to build for people, on and on and on.
Well, but if you take local economy, automobiles as an image of this, part of this movement, this newness, this new commons, is perhaps as yet an unclear way of saying we have to find a better way of living together, a more,
Yes.
I don't even know what the language is, but as human beings, we're not thriving in what we've created.
No.
And there's a coming together. And therefore, if I'm hearing you right, a sense of a longing for the church to say, this is where God's called us and what God's called us to be.
I believe that 100%.
Yeah.
I actually think that if you look through the lens of, say, the gospel as how we fit together with God
Mm-hmm.
and one another in the created world, there's almost a sense at which our larger cultures are saying we need something. They might ignore the God part, or might not, but there's a sense of like, we need to figure out how to live together again. And that is going to include technology, and it's going to include airplanes, and it's going to include all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we have to figure out, I think, how do we fit together like teams?
That's a big question.
It's a big question,
Yeah.
and this is not just a church question. This is a massive global question. And it's not an American or Canadian or European thing. It's happening all over the place.
So, again, to pick up one of the themes that you said, another part of what you're saying, which I think is New Commons, is you don't answer those questions like we need a new way of living together with big mega ideas. That the place where this gets worked out is in the local. I think one of the words that people use is subsidiarity, which is how can you bring this down to the most basic levels of interaction? And therefore the local is this place. Can you say a bit more about that?
Sure, I think that, I forget who is a poet who said, we make the path by walking.
Mm-hmm. I
And
don't think it was a North American.
probably not. I think it's Spanish, actually. But I think that's the day that we're in. And so I like that phrase because it's going to be actually in our actual places that we're going to have to forge this new ground. We're going to have to practice and experiment and fail and try. This is not going to be easy. But it's also not going to be kind of a new technique that can be stamped on high, scaled globally, and then we're done.
Right.
It's going to be literally patch by patch. I think we're going to figure this out. And
So-
of course, cultures come into that in a big way.
So let me use an analogy and see if I'm getting this. Right now in Paris, huge global summit,
Yes.
and I think all of us are cheering people on
Yeah.
and saying to the leaders of the nation states, "Please do this."
Yes.
And yet, in the midst of this conversation, there's something else inside of me that says that's not where it's going to take place. Not that those are unimportant, but it's on the ground, in the local, as people come together and say, how do we change the way we've dealt with our environment and our eating? Is that the sort of thing that we're...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Someone who's been influential to me on this from a civic perspective is a sociologist named Benjamin Barber.
Uh-huh.
He wrote this book called When Mayors Rule the World.
Yeah, I read it.
And his premise is basically nation states are coming together to try and solve interdependent problems, and it's just not working. It's almost unfair to ask them to do it because of their own sovereignty and the moneyed interests they're all coming from. But you look at cities, mayors on down, city council, neighborhood associations, well, they can get at interdependent problems together. And frankly,